Part 3, nephrotic and nephritic. So symptoms, signs explained. So nothing completely new here. So you're still looking at the glomerulus. You're still looking at the same part that's being damaged. This is still a nephron. So the high blood pressure, again, failure of the filter. So you're still going to be retaining a heck of a lot of sodium. The water is going to follow it. This leads to a lot of fluid retention. When you retain fluid, some of that's being held inside the vessels. And so a lot of the high blood pressure is not due so much to heart issues, but the fact that you've just got more fluid to pump. The swelling, same thing. Sodium retention leads to more fluid. And so when you've got more fluid in your vessels and just in your body in general, it's going to leak into your soft tissues. And by the way, even though it's nephritic syndrome and you've got blood that's leaking out into your urine, you're also losing protein too. And so you're going to have some symptom overlap with nephrotic syndrome. So if you're peeing out some protein, that means you've got less oncotic pressure in your bloodstream. And so you're still going to see the same puffiness issues that you do with nephrotic syndrome. So, swelling under the eyes, ankles, that kind of stuff. Decreased urine output. And this comes from that even though you've got damage to the nephron and there are things leaking through in the glomerulus, since some of the nephrons are damaged, you've got decreased total perfusion to the number of nephrons in your kidneys in general. So the nephrons that are getting perfused are leaking, but you've got decreased total perfusion in general. And so when that happens, you just don't make as much pee. So you don't make as much pee, and the nephrons that are getting perfused are leaking. So you leak red blood cells and protein. And what's getting damaged here are actually the cells themselves. And so when you get cell damage, you're not just leaking damage to the areas between the capillaries and the glomerulus, but it's destruction of total numbers of cells. So this means bigger gaps. So the red blood cells can now fit through. And if the red blood cells can fit through and they're going to show up in your urine, guess what? If it's big enough for a big piece to fit through, the proteins are going to fit through too. So if an entire red blood cell can fit through, the protein can too. And just as a side note, if you see blood in your urine and either no protein or very little protein, the damage is probably not in the glomerulus. It's probably somewhere else outside of the glomerulus. So like your ureter or your bladder. So you can think kidney stone or urinary tract infection or bladder damage or something like that. So it's just a different model of thinking. So instead of thinking like nephrotic syndrome and glomerulonephritis, a different way of thinking this is thinking of all of this as glomerulonephritis disease and then to split it out. If you see only protein in the urine, think of it as the terminology is non-proliferative because you're not seeing cell damage and reactive changes to that. The cells are being relatively spared. If you're seeing cell damage, you're going to see blood and protein in the urine, and so it's proliferative disease. So it's not really right or wrong, but it's like, okay, it's all glomerulus. If there's no protein, there's not as much cell damage or very little or none. And then if there is blood in the urine and protein, it's proliferative disease. And so that's why you're able to see some diagnoses show up on both sides. And again, lupus is a great example, is that if the lupus is going after the cells themselves, you're going to see a heck of a lot of blood in the urine. And you're like, the cells that are in the glomerulus are getting destroyed. And if they're not, then you know where the damage is being done. So even though it gets a little bit confusing, focus on the 90%. You know the filter's getting damaged. So the details are focus on whether or not you see blood. If you see blood, the glomerular cells are getting hurt, and if they're not, if there's no blood, it's not. Thank you, guys.